Again, it builds in the protection of low calorie density, high nutrient density, and a broad base of the needed dynamic that we have. And that includes refined cereals, pastas, and the like. One of my favorite old studies, this is a true study, it's hard to believe. Truth is sometimes stranger than fiction. They did a study on breakfast cereals. And you know how these children's breakfast cereals can be sometimes 60 to 80% refined sugar. Captain Poo Poo and Captain Pop Pop, you've seen those, right? No. They did a study where they took one group of animals and they fed them the cereal. They took another group of animals and they fed them the box that it came in. They ground up the box. It looked like shredded wheat. They fed it to those animals. The animals who ate the box did far better in every cognitive test, in every test that they could test on those animals. So you want to feed these cereals to your kids, give them the box. Give them the box. All right. Now, the diet must be lower in fat. Now, we recommend from the standpoint of a more wholesome nutrition that the fat content of the diet be about 15%. Now, where do I get those numbers? If you look at some of the most profound studies that have been done on longevity and health, and one that I often talk about is the China study, and some of you may be aware of the China study. This is kind of like the Ferrari, the Lamborghini of nutritional studies. This was done across the provinces of China over many, many years. It started from the biochemistry department of Cornell University. And the bottom line is the rural Chinese that had the lowest outcome of obesity and heart disease and cancers had a fat content of about 15%. This is also the percentage of fat that has been used in some of the best studies that have ever been done by Esselstyn at the Cleveland Clinic and Ornish and his cohorts to reverse cardiovascular disease. It was the only level. Now, both of those physicians, and Esselstyn did it first, took some of the most profound heart disease patients. Please understand this. These were people that were given up for dead. And in the 8 years before he got them, those 18 people that he studied had close to 50 major cardiac events, bypasses, stents, major ischemic attacks. He put them on a vegan, a plant-based diet of 15% fat or less. In the 11 years that followed, those 18 people that had 50 major cardiac events had 0 cardiac events. Now understand, these were the most devastating heart disease patients you can imagine. So I use that 15% as a cutoff because that was the level of the rural Chinese, that was the level of the heart disease studies. But understand something, the United States government and the United States or the American Heart Association is recommending 30 to 35%. Now, if you follow the guidelines of the American government and the American Heart Association, you have a pretty good shot at developing a stroke and/or heart disease. You mean my government is telling me something that's not in my best interest? Yeah, that's what I'm saying, yeah. I know it's hard to believe that. Now we're going to come back to that. Some of that is because of the unholy marriage between the government and the meat and dairy industries, and we'll come back to that. But right now, I just want you to understand that when we talk about fat, understand that fat, being based and built from fatty acids, will begin that process of acidifying the body, shifting the acid-alkaline nature of that body, and it will play a role as a foundation of inflammation. And it's not just the amount of fat that becomes important, it's what happens to that fat when you cook and process it. So when we put high heat and high pressure and we have all of that stuff done to fat, we hydrogenate it, we transform it, and we oxidize it. In fact, one of the most dangerous free radicals that is produced in the human body is when we subject fat to high heat and pressure. So my recommendation with fats and oils is to get them as close to the foods in which they exist, and I think you do a better job. There is no animal in nature that extracts the pure fat from their food chain, puts it in big bottles of liquid fat, and then douses it on everything. You know, I grew up in an Italian household in New York City as a child, and when I came home to my Italian household at the end of the day, as you entered the house, you were doused with oil. Oil was everywhere. Now, I recommend, as you can see on the slide, a small amount of olive and/or coconut oil. They've gotten some positive airplay, but my feeling is the more you get your oils in whole food form, that's deep greens, nuts, avocados, seeds, even all of those natural plant-based oils, legumes, beans, grains, rice, etc. You build in a natural protection for the overconsumption of fats and oils. Now remember this, we've talked about the fact that a plant-based diet has a low calorie density, and that's one of its strong suits, that's one of its very protective functions. But understand that fat has the highest calorie density of all food. Fat gives us 9 calories for every gram of substance, where carbohydrates and protein only provide 4. So if you take a healthy, low-calorie based diet and you start blasting it with fats and oils, you are now raising that calorie density and you're undermining the real benefit. So from the standpoint of weight gain and weight loss, this becomes a very real piece to keep that under some kind of degree of regulation. And keeping that fat content in that place really helps a lot. So the avocados, nuts, seeds, and the like, and by the way, those oils that I'm recommending, those foods with those natural oils, also have the highest concentration, the highest amount of omega-3 fatty acids. Now, as you well know, everybody's been inundated with this idea of fish oils and omega-3 oils. As it turns out, those oils are anti-inflammatory. They reduce inflammation. And you're going to see that inflammation is one of the things in the body that will promote abnormal weight gain. In fact, inflammation will block a hormone in your brain that gives you the signal that it's time to stop eating. We're going to come back to that hormone. But right now, just understand that these natural plant-based oils are going to give you the best fat for reducing inflammation and promoting the integrity of your nervous system, your immune system, all those wonderful systems, okay? Then we come to the idea that the diet needs to be high in fiber and water. Why? Because fiber and water give us a filling up effect. Think about that. This is another benefit of plants, because not only do they have all of the micronutrients that provide us with nutritional value, but by being loaded with fiber and water, they also give us a satisfaction effect. If you had a couple of bowls of cooked oatmeal here this morning, many of you would feel full for most of the day for less than 400 calories. So it builds in that protection. In fact, when you're eating a diet like this one, plant-based, very high in fiber and very high in water, and you're eating it slowly, it is virtually impossible to develop a problem with portion control. Because by the time you did, you would have to explode at the dinner table. And in 35 years of teaching this, no one has done that yet. I haven't had anybody go up in spontaneous combustion. We've had a few people get close, but not quite. So I call the water in fruits and vegetables living water, because it is by far the best water source that you can take. And this is the beautiful thing with most of the fresh plants and fresh produce that you're consuming. It has that water content, and it gives you that satisfaction effect. It's also the reason why we want to consume as much of those fruits and veggies in their natural raw state. Because what happens when you cook fruits and vegetables? What's one of the first things you lose? Water. If you take a potato and weigh it, bake it and weigh it, the baked potato weighs less because of the water loss. So the bottom line here is getting those things in more of a natural, fresh state builds in the calorie protection, builds in the fat protection, builds in the nutrient protection, builds in the fiber and water protection. Remember, as human primates, we have one of the longest digestive tracts in nature. So we need a diet very high in fiber and water to allow things to transit and move through that tract. That's a plant-based approach. And when we deviate from that eating plan, we interfere with the normal progression and movement and transit through that gut, all right? Now the next piece is a biggie, because the diet also needs to be low in protein. And this is going to sound like heresy to some of you out there, and I need to clarify this very carefully. From the 1970s and 1980s, we have known enough in research and nutritional science to observe that when animals are put on high protein diets, they are more prone to the initiation and promotion of tumors and cancers from any known cancer agent. That means if you take an agent that we know can create cancer in a living creature, and that animal was on a high protein diet, they will promote and initiate cancers so much more significantly than an animal that was on a lower protein approach. And when that protein is of animal origin, the cancer promotion is that much worse. So that we have a model where we look now and we find that many of the long-lived cultures, again, are taking a protein content that's only about 10 to 12% of their total calories. Not the 30 to 40% of an Atkins-like diet, not the 30 to 40% of a Zone or a South Beach type diet. We don't need that amount of protein. Remember, protein is built by amino acids. Once again, get that word acid. As we exaggerate that protein, we're exaggerating that acidity. And let me put this to bed forever. When is the most rapid time, let me ask you, the most rapid time of active human growth? When do we grow the most as human beings? Anybody?
After exercise?
Well, no, I mean, in a window of time after you're born, when would it be? What years? First year of life, she says. Anybody disagree with that? You stunned the crowd. She's absolutely correct. First year of life. In the first year of life, babies will triple their birth weight and double their brain size. There is never a time where you'll see that kind of growth again in a human creature. Now, what's the most fit food for that baby in that first year of life when they're tripling their birth weight and doubling their brain size? Mama's milk. You know what the protein content of mother's milk is? Between 5 and 10%. At a time when that baby is growing exponentially at a rate that it will never grow again, it only needs 5 to 10% protein. Do you think that as an adult you need 30 to 40 under any guise? No. That has been a devastating recommendation. And it is something that dies hard because we have been sold the unconscionable idea that for us to be healthy, for us to even regulate our weight, we need to eat and consume a very high protein diet. This has just been an unconscionable situation, and it creates the potential for a lot of change, and that of course includes a whole range of things related to cardiovascular disease and things which we'll talk about. Now, I also recommend, and this is going to be challenging, because I recommend that not only that the protein content be about 10% of the diet, but that the amount coming from animal products be less than 10% of that 10%. Now, I don't recommend any. I personally, and this is my personal choice that I've done over many years, I've lived as a vegan physician over 30 years. The last beef I had was in the 1960s. The last meat and dairy was in the late 70s and early 80s. So I've been maintaining this kind of an approach for a very long time. But what we observe is that once again, lean, healthy cultures of low risk, whether it's the China study, Okinawans, take a very small part of their diet from animal protein. And when I say less than 10%, this is going to be the shocking part to some of you, that is about 4 to 8 ounces of animal protein a week. A week. Now, and I want less than 2 ounces of that to be red meat. Now, I give you that amount because that's a transition amount. What I'm talking about today, it's not about making anybody a saint, but it is about reducing risk. And I find that if you can get to the place of working with 4 to 8 ounces a week, you can get to the place of working with no ounces a week. And I'm going to talk to you about why that really becomes important on other levels. But for right now, I want to just lay out that issue with protein. Now, we go from there into, well, you know what? What are the problems with high protein? There are issues. And one of these, to top off, is this increased acidity and inflammation. Now, the building blocks of protein are what? Amino acids. Key word is acid. Now, the body tends to be slightly alkaline. So when you create acidity in the body, understand what's happening. You're creating wear and tear. You're creating a little bit of tissue damage. But your body has an intelligent response to tissue damage, and only one. And that is to mobilize through your immune system the process of inflammation. Now, inflammation is a healthy survival tool, But if that wear and tear is ongoing, meal in, meal out, exaggerated by constant high protein intake, that inflammation response will outlive its usefulness and now will become a stress and problem in its own right. So that many physicians now feel that inflammation is the foundation, the common denominator for most of the major epidemics of our culture. Heart disease, stroke, cancer, diabetes, and obesity, guess what, are diseases of chronic inflammation. And anything that helps us reduce that inflammation reduces that risk. This is another benefit of a plant-based diet. Why? Because it is an alkaline-forming diet. So it eliminates, reverses, and prevents the process of inflammation. You want to reverse diabetes, heart disease, cancers, and the like? You've got to provide for a lower inflammatory process. This is a very real piece because this inflammation causes blood vessels to plaque, blocking those vessels, not only into your heart, but into your brain, into your genitals, into your kidneys. That's why when we have an epidemic of heart disease from all of that blocking blood vessels, blocked blood vessels from inflammation and change, we see epidemics that go hand in hand. So as men and women have an epidemic of heart disease, there's also an epidemic of kidney disease. There's an epidemic of dementia and memory loss because there's blood vessels going to all of those organs that are getting blocked. And this, of course, plays for even sexual dysfunction, which is a nightmare in this culture. Right now in the United States, after the age of 45 to 50, 1/3 to 1/2 of all men deal with some aspect of impotency. That's why every 3 seconds, what are the commercials you see on television? Erectile dysfunction. I'm so burnt out on erectile dysfunction. Viva Viagra. This is my favorite commercial, by the way. You've seen this one. These 5 men that gather at the home of one of these men, sitting in a circle with their musical instruments, singing about their impotency. These are the 5 most confident men in America. I want to meet these 5 guys, by the way. And the warnings for these drugs are not warnings to most men. You may go deaf and blind, but you may have a 4-hour erection. Trust me, right before that man loses all of his hearing and his eyesight, he will knock on every door in the neighborhood and show that 4-hour erection to anybody that'll look at it. Now, bottom line is, understand something else. If you want to reverse erectile dysfunction or heart disease or dementia, you have got to prevent inflammatory vascular blockage disease. And a plant-based approach gives you those tools to do just that. Now, there's a couple of other pieces here. When we look at the cells of animal protein, or protein in general, but especially in animal bodies, the genetic material of those cells is made up of a class of compounds called purines. You may not know that name, but you know one of the major things that comes from those purines, and that is uric acid. Now, uric acid is a byproduct of high protein, affluent diets. Now, if you think about it, animals in nature that are really carnivores, true carnivores, lions and tigers, they are geared for eating nothing but flesh. They're geared for eating nothing but all those vegetarians that run across the savannah, antelopes and gazelles and zebras. Now, they're generating, as a result of that, very high levels of uric acid. A very acidifying acid affecting joints and all that. So why don't we see lions and tigers in the jungle with their hip and knee replacements walking on the Discovery Channel? Because these animals have an enzyme called uricase, which allows them to break down uric acid. Now, I think it makes sense to anybody that if you have an animal that is actually built, created for the purpose of eating those kind of foods, they're going to also have the equipment that allows them to eat that way. Guess what? As human primates, we don't have that enzyme. So when we build up uric acid to any great degree, it has no choice but to go into the bloodstream, irritating everything that it touches, or it will precipitate like crystals under the pull of gravity into the bones and joints of the feet and lower legs, contributing to a form of arthritis that we call gout. Now, how many of you ever see those pictures, those old pictures of Henry VIII with his leg up, wrapped in the gout, the big swollen Henry, not that young Henry VIII on the HBO special, you know that one right now. This is the big old Charles Lawton Henry VIII. Henry VIII was on the original Atkins type diet, high fat, high protein, and all he ate was meat from the pristine forests of England. Trust me, the meat you're eating in this culture is not pristine. and it provides a lot of irritation, and this uric acid toxicity is profound. Now there's another piece here. In the membranes and in the fluids of the bodies of animals, all of the cells, it is made up of a very unsaturated fatty acid called arachidonic acid. This is common in the membranes of all the cells of animal tissue, including ours, by the way. But this arachidonic acid is part of the omega-6 oils that, guess what, dramatically promotes inflammation. It promotes a form of prostaglandins in the body. These are inflammatory chemicals that, in a way, balance the immune system. This arachidonic acid dramatically enhances inflammation. So when we eat a large amount of animal protein, we're enhancing that inflammatory process. Now, that wouldn't be as bad if that animal protein became that very small part of our protein, that 10% or less. But guess what? In the United States, we are taking somewhere in the range of 70 to 80% of our protein from those animal sources. So we have, in a sense, driven the body in the direction of inflammation and immune suppression. So from that issue of higher protein, we've got an inflammatory change, we've got an immune system enhancement, uric acid toxicity, and again, the point was well made before that when the body becomes more acidic, you have to neutralize and buffer that acid. So you will pull very effective minerals out of your bones. That's why one of the most profound causes of osteoporosis in this culture are high animal-based diets. They are feeding bone loss like you wouldn't believe. And that is a huge, huge piece. Now, then we talk about increased liver toxicity, cancer risk. We already mentioned this. Now, this is the reason why also. Understand that the liver in the human body is kind of like a sentinel on guard, so that everything that goes into your body has to be screened by your liver. So the liver plays a major role in looking at everything that comes in, whether it's food we eat, drugs we take, pesticides that we're exposed to. The liver gets that first look at everything going into your body. So the liver is bearing a lot of the burden of toxicity. So you'll see many people when they're really starting to go into an eating plan to promote weight loss, sometimes they'll do fasting procedures or they'll do juice programs or detoxification. Well, I'm here to tell you that those